Imagine a clear, crisp Tuesday morning, you know the kind, just a normal day. People commuting, kids off to school, grabbing that first coffee, and the skyline reflecting this brilliant late summer sun. For millions, September 11, 2001 just started like any other Tuesday. And then bang, in an instant, that normalcy just shattered. At 8:46 a.m. sharp, American Airlines Flight 11 wasn't hitting cross-country anymore. It crashed right into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. The impact, it was devastating. Unimaginable, just this gaping, fiery wound high up on the building. And for a few seconds, maybe, just silence. Like the city held its breath. Then just chaos. People trying to figure out what they were even seeing. Can you actually put yourself there watching it live?
Yeah.
That immediate switch from, a peaceful morning to just utter terror and confusion. So as we dig into this really pivotal moment, the big question for this deep dive is, well, how did one single day, this one set of attacks, how did it not just redefine America, but fundamentally reshape, global politics, our whole idea of security, freedom, even who we are? This isn't just about recounting what happened. We want to explore the deeper stuff, the forces already at play, the immediate reactions, human, government, and, well, the ripple effects that are still going on decades later. Things that affect everything from how we travel to how countries deal with each other.
Yeah, and to really get our arms around something this huge, this complex, we've pulled together a pretty comprehensive set of sources. We really tried to cover all the bases. We've dug deep into official documents like the actual 9/11 Commission report. That gives you the exhaustive, authoritative breakdown of events, what led up to them, the failures involved. We've also looked at critical insights from authors like Lawrence Wright. His book, The Looming Tower, it's fantastic for understanding the origins of al-Qaeda, their ideology, the key players. And then there are the narratives from people who were right there inside the response. We've got Without Precedent, which is Keenan Hamilton, the co-chairs of the 9/11 Commission, telling their story. It gives you a real behind-the-scenes look. Richard Clarke's Against All Enemies, too. He was a top counterterrorism guy, so you get the intelligence debates, the policy stuff leading up to it, and, of course, primary sources. Stuff from the National September 11 Memorial and Museum, the National Archives, plus analysis from places like Smithsonian Magazine, the Terrorism Studies Association. The goal here really is to pull out the most important pieces of knowledge, the key insights from all these different viewpoints, and sort of guide you through the complexities. It's way more than just the headlines, because the story of 9/11, the shock was immediate, but it really didn't just start on that Tuesday morning. Not at all. The roots go way, way back. You have to look at the late 1980s, actually. During the Soviet-Afghan War, that was this brutal, long conflict, Soviets versus the Afghan Mujahideen. And it was right there in that conflict that al-Qaeda, the group responsible for 9/11, really started to form. You had key figures like Osama bin Laden, wealthy Saudi guy, and other Arab fighters, the Afghan Arabs. They went to Afghanistan to help fight the Soviets. They saw it as a holy war, basically, against invaders.
Okay, that's a really crucial starting point to unpack. So al-Qaeda wasn't just some random group popping up. It was forged in a specific conflict, fighting one superpower. And what's fascinating and honestly pretty disturbing is how that fight against the Soviets, once they pulled out of Afghanistan in '89, how it just flipped, how they turned their sights directly onto another superpower, the United States. Our sources, especially someone like Lawrence Wright, they really stress this. After the Soviets were gone, bin Laden and his followers increasingly pointed to the U.S. as the, quote, primary enemy of Islam. And this wasn't just abstract talk, right? It was tied to specific things. U.S. troops in Saudi Arabia after the Gulf War, U.S. support for Israel, the sanctions on Iraq, all of that fueled it. For them, America became the new obstacle, the new threat to Muslim lands and culture.
Exactly. Their whole ideology sort of solidified around this radical, very rigid interpretation of Islam. It explicitly called for jihad, but they defined it very specifically as a global holy war against America and its allies. And this wasn't just talk, like you said. It wasn't a theological debate club. It was a clear statement of intent. And it led to actual violent actions long before 2001. Their grievances were mixed, Religious, definitely, but deeply political, too. A sense of humiliation, injustice, combined with this real desire for a global Islamic state, free from Western influence.
And what's really undeniable, looking back at the sources, is that al-Qaeda wasn't some brand new threat the U.S. suddenly discovered on 9/11. They knew about them. They'd already carried out this chilling series of attacks through the 90s. Each one, looking back now, feels like a stark warning sign. You had the 1993 bombing of the World Trade Center. Remember that. A truck bomb in the parking garage. Killed 6 people, injured over 1,000. Like a dress rehearsal almost. Then, August '98. The bombings of the U.S. embassies in Kenya and Tanzania, almost simultaneous. Killed over 200 people, including Americans, injured thousands. And then October 2000, the attack on the USS Cole in Yemen killed 17 American sailors. These weren't small things. They were major attacks on U.S. targets.
But, and this is really crucial, even though those attacks were horrific, they caused American deaths, none of them really grabbed the sustained national attention inside the U.S. the way 9/11 would. They were seen as serious terrorism, absolutely, but they didn't fundamentally change the national conversation or trigger that massive shield on policy in the same way, not even close.
So why? That's the question, isn't it? Why didn't those earlier attacks, even though they were significant, why didn't they trigger that same immediate, like, seismic shift in American thinking and policy that 9/11 clearly did? What was so different?
I think it comes down to a few key things. The scale, just the sheer audacity, and critically, the location. The previous attacks, tragic as they were, happened overseas. They felt distant to many Americans, geographically removed. 9/11 brought that violence right onto American soil in a way we hadn't seen since Pearl Harbor, really. And it wasn't just a military target like Pearl Harbor. It was civilian office buildings, a transport hub, the Pentagon itself, the audacity of using commercial planes full of ordinary people as weapons against these iconic symbols of American economic and military power that was just unprecedented. Plus, the visuals, the towers collapsing live on TV, millions watching it happen in real time across the country, around the world. You couldn't ignore it. It created this collective, visceral shock, that immediacy, that closeness, the fact that it was American civilians and their daily lives being attacked, that changed everything. It shattered that feeling of being safe, untouchable here at home. So with that context, the actual planning for the 9/11 attacks started to take shape around 1999. That's when Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who people often call KSM, he presented his plan to Osama bin Laden. KSM had history. He'd been involved in earlier plots like the 93 Trade Center bombing and something called the Bojinka plot to bomb U.S. airliners. His idea, as laid out in the 9/11 Commission report, was pretty simple on the surface, but terrifying. Hijack commercial planes and crash them into, as he put it, important American buildings.
Right. And when you look at the intel briefings, KSM's confessions, what jumps out is the cold calculation behind it. It wasn't random. They specifically chose the World Trade Center, hitting American economic power, global capitalism, right at its heart. Then the Pentagon striking the core of U.S. military strength. And then the idea of possibly hitting the White House or the Capitol building. I mean, that's a direct hit on political leadership, the symbol of American democracy. This wasn't just about causing death, though obviously that was part of it. It was designed for maximum psychological damage, to shake the nation by hitting those pillars of American power and identity. The planning shows they really understood those symbols and wanted to provoke this huge, maybe even an over-the-top response. And once bin Laden okayed the basic plan, they started the recruitment and training. It was meticulous, took several years. Sources say they picked 19 guys carefully, most of them from Saudi Arabia. They came to the U.S. on various visas, enrolled in flight schools. And here's that detail that's just so chilling. They only wanted to learn how to control the planes, how to make turns, how to descend quickly. They showed zero interest in learning how to actually land safely. That detail, which apparently confused some flight instructors back then, was such a clear sign it was a suicide mission. The hijackers came over in the months before the attacks, just blended in. Lived in apartments, Florida, New Jersey, other places. Seemed like normal flight students, all while prepping for that horrific day.
Yeah, that specific detail about the training, it just raises this really unsettling question, doesn't it? Why only control? And how did that seemingly small thing end up being such a terrifying but tragically missed clue about what they planned? It says so much about their dedication, their absolute commitment to the mission. They weren't planning an escape. It was a one-way trip, period. And the fact they could just blend into normal American life, go to flight school like anyone else, it masked their real purpose, made their final days seem chillingly ordinary to people around them. That level of commitment, combined with the sort of mundane nature of their final preparations, it highlights how meticulous they were and honestly how hard it was for intelligence agencies to connect those dots beforehand.
So the morning of September 11, 2001, that clear sky just hiding this unfolding horror. 19 hijackers split into 4 teams. They board 4 commercial planes, leaving from big airports, Logan in Boston, Newark, Dulles near D.C. And here's a key detail they chose deliberately. All 4 flights were going to California, transcontinental, which meant they were loaded with huge amounts of jet fuel for that long trip, fuel that would tragically just amplify the destruction when the planes became weapons.
And the first hit came so fast. 8:46 a.m., American Airlines Flight 11, a Boeing 767, slams right into the North Tower of the World Trade Center, hit between the 93rd and 99th floors. The impact was just devastating, a massive fireball high up. It instantly cut off stairwells, trapped hundreds of people above that point. But amazingly, despite the force, the fire, the building itself designed to withstand a lot of it stayed standing initially. In those first moments, just massive confusion in lower Manhattan. People in the South Tower, which hadn't been hit yet, some started evacuating, just on instinct, emergency crews rushing in, but others tragically weren't sure what happened. Maybe thought it was a horrible accident. They stayed at their desks, trying to figure it out, getting conflicting reports. Then, just 17 minutes later, 9:03 a.m., United Airlines Flight 175, another 767, crashes into the South Tower between floors 77 and 85. This time it was caught live on TV. News crews were already there, cameras pointed at the smoking North Tower. Some millions, literally millions around the world, watched in horror as that second plane hit, another huge fireball. And that visual, that undeniable second strike, broadcast everywhere, it instantly made it bone-chillingly clear this was no accident. This wasn't some tragic mistake. America was under attack. A coordinated attack. You could almost hear the world gasp.
Yeah, that second plane hitting live on TV for everyone to see. That was the moment, wasn't it? When the understanding just shifted completely, globally. It went from maybe being a horrifying accident, pilot error, mechanical failure, something, to being an undeniable, calculated act of war. You can just feel that collective realization rippling out. Leaders, ordinary people, everyone suddenly understanding the malicious intent. It was a clear message.
And the attacks kept coming, tragically. At 9:47 a.m., American Airlines Flight 77, a Boeing 757 this time, it had gone way off course. It crashed into the western side of Pentagon, the headquarters of the Department of Defense, right outside D.C. The impact caused part of the building to collapse, started this massive fire, and the symbolism there was huge. Hitting the Pentagon showed they weren't just aiming at economic targets like the World Trade Center to cause fear and disruption. They were going right for the strategic military heart of the U.S. government, trying to hit America's ability to defend itself, to project power.
It really does underscore how comprehensive the attack plan was, doesn't it? It wasn't just about fear or casualties, although those were immense. It was about striking the fundamental pillars of American power: economic, military, and potentially political. The target selection showed a really sophisticated, albeit terrifying, understanding of how to inflict the maximum psychological and symbolic damage, not just physical. And then Flight 93. United Airlines Flight 93, another Boeing 757, also hijacked. It was almost certainly heading for Washington, D.C. Strong evidence suggests the target was either the White House or the Capitol building, aiming for the ultimate symbols of American democracy. But something incredible, just profoundly heroic, happened on that plane. The passengers, they started using the earphones, maybe saw news snippets on seatback TVs. They found out about the other attacks through calls with family, with loved ones on the ground. They figured out what was happening, understood their likely fate and the plane's target. And facing that horror, a group of them, passengers and crew, made this incredibly brave decision: fight back. They made calls, told people what they were going to do. And then, based on the commission report, the cockpit voice recorder, they rushed the cockpit, tried to overpower the hijackers. The hijackers, rather than lose control, deliberately crashed the plane into a field in Stony Creek Township, Pennsylvania. That was at 10:03 a.m. Everyone on board died. All 40 passengers and crew, the 4 hijackers. But their actions, their heroism, stopped that plane from hitting its target in Washington, saved who knows how many lives, and prevented an even deeper scar in the nation's capital.
It really raises that chilling what if, doesn't it? What if they hadn't fought back? If that fourth target, the White House, the Capitol, had been hit? How different would the immediate aftermath, the global reaction, have been? Preventing that strike through just sheer passenger courage, this incredible act of defiance, it potentially averted an even worse psychological blow, an attack on the very seat of U.S. democracy. The consequences are hard to even imagine. That field in Pennsylvania is really a monument to unbelievable bravery. The horror of that morning then culminated in this just unimaginable spectacle of destruction. At 9:59 a.m., the South Tower collapsed, the one that was hit second. It had been badly damaged by Flight 175's impact, and the jet fuel fires were just incredibly intense. Now, the fires didn't melt the steel, that's a misconception, but they critically weakened the core columns, the floor supports. And that led to this progressive, catastrophic collapse, like a pancake effect from the top down. And this, too, was captured live on TV. Millions watching the unthinkable happen, compounding the horror. Then less than half an hour later, 10:28 a.m., the North Tower, the first one hit, it also gave way. Collapsed in a similar terrifying fashion due to the sustained fires and the structural damage. The collapse of both towers, these huge symbols, created this massive, suffocating cloud. Pulverized concrete, steel, everything. It just blanketed lower Manhattan.
Yeah.
Turned this vibrant area into something apocalyptic, dust and ruin everywhere. In total, the attacks killed nearly 3,000 people from over 90 different countries, making them the deadliest terrorist attacks in history. And among the dead, hundreds of first responders, firefighters, police, paramedics, guys who rushed into those burning buildings knowing the risk, trying to save others.
The sheer scale of it. Yeah. The loss of life, watching those iconic towers just fall. First one, then the other. It's just burned into memory for anyone who saw it or has seen the footage since. It wasn't just buildings coming down, it was lives, futures, whole world just vanishing in this terrifying cloud of dust. The human cost is staggering. Not just the people who died that day, but all the people who got sick later from the dust and debris, the families just left with this huge sudden hole in their lives. Across the country, the immediate reaction was just profound shock, disbelief, and this terrifying feeling of vulnerability. For so many people, it was just incomprehensible, almost surreal. The U.S. hadn't been attacked like that on its own soil since Pearl Harbor in 1941. This was totally unprecedented in modern American history. The scale, the audacity, the coordination, it was just off the charts. The whole country basically just stopped, froze, everyone desperately trying to process what had just happened and what it meant for their lives, their country, their basic sense of safety. It was this moment of deep, shared trauma playing out on every TV screen.
And if you connect that to the bigger picture, this was way more than just a physical attack. Even with the immense death toll and destruction, it was a profound psychological blow. It shattered this deeply held sense of invulnerability that many Americans, maybe unconsciously, took for granted. You know, the oceans on either side always felt like protection. 9/11 completely changed that. It brought the threat of terrorism home, made it feel real, palpable, domestic, no longer just something happening far away. And that created this immediate, urgent demand for security. Stronger measures, even if it meant giving up some freedoms. That feeling just wasn't there in the same way before. The response came fast, and it was massive. It fundamentally changed American policy, both here at home and around the world. President Bush, George W. Bush, declared a war on terror, a global, open-ended fight against terrorist groups and the countries that harbored them. He vowed to bring those responsible to justice, and that declaration quickly turned into military action. October 2001, Operation Enduring Freedom kicked off in Afghanistan. That's where al-Qaeda was based, sheltered by the Taliban regime. The immediate goal: disrupt al-Qaeda, capture bin Laden. They did manage to topple the Taliban pretty quickly, but bin Laden got away for almost 10 years. Then later, March 2003, came the invasion of Iraq. The Bush administration claimed Iraq had weapons of mass destruction, links to al-Qaeda. That reasoning, as the 9/11 Commission report later detailed, became incredibly controversial and was largely debunked later on. But those two wars, Afghanistan and Iraq, stemming directly from 9/11, they became the longest wars in American history. Cost trillions of dollars, immense human cost, both for U.S. troops and the people in those countries.
Right, this wasn't just talk, it was a massive pivot in U.S. foreign policy and military thinking. Before 9/11, policy was more about deterrence, dealing with states, conventional threats. After 9/11, it shifted hard towards being proactive, intelligence-driven, targeting non-state groups anywhere in the world. Counterinsurgency became the focus. And this changed how we thought about things like national sovereignty. Introduced ideas like preemptive strikes, chasing terrorists across borders even without permission. These precedents, born out of that urgent need to stop another attack, they're still shaping debates today. About international law, drone strikes, military interventions, it really kicked off a whole new era of American foreign policy. And here at home, the changes were just as sweeping. Unprecedented overhaul of national security, legislation came fast. The USA Patriot Act, that's a mouthful, the official name is huge, but everyone calls it the Patriot Act. Rushed through Congress, signed into law by October 2001, just weeks after the attacks. And it gave the government sweeping new powers for surveillance, investigation, prosecuting terrorism, things like roving wiretaps, easier access to records, business records, library records, even more info sharing between agencies. It immediately sparked huge debates: privacy versus security. Civil liberties groups were deeply concerned about potential overreach, abuse, hitting constitutional rights. That debate is still going on, really. And beyond the laws, the government itself restructured massively. November 2002, the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, was created. It pulled together 22 different federal agencies, Coast Guard, Secret Service, FEMA, all under one roof. The idea was to centralize the response to terror threats, though putting all those pieces together was a huge challenge at first. Airport security, that's probably a change most people feel most directly. It completely transformed. Before 9/11, security was mostly private companies. Afterwards, the Transportation Security Administration, the TSA, was created in November 2001. Federal agencies, specifically for airport security. That brought in all the new screening procedures we know today. Metal detectors, x-rays, eventually body scanners, the limits on liquids. It created the whole security environment we fly in now. And it went beyond airports. Even building design changed. New focus on making buildings more resistant to attacks. Hardening things, controlling access.
It really does raise that critical ongoing question for you, the listener. How did all these big changes designed for security, how did they change that delicate balance with civil liberties? And what does that actually mean for you personally today? The expanded surveillance under the Patriot Act, for example, that kicked off fierce arguments about privacy versus safety that are still evolving with technology. The airport screening, yeah, it's an inconvenience, but became the new normal. A trade-off, maybe, of convenience for feeling safer. It forced this national conversation. How much freedom are we willing to give up for collective security? And are the measures even working effectively? That tension, security versus liberty, it's a huge part of the 9/11 legacy. It shapes our laws, our daily lives, often in ways we don't even notice anymore. And looking beyond the U.S., 9/11 dramatically changed American foreign policy and increased U.S. involvement globally, especially in the Middle East. It actually led to new alliances forming and strengthening old ones. Countries around the world offered support immediately. NATO, for the first time ever, invoked Article 5 and attack on one is an attack on all. That was huge, signaled global solidarity. And lots of countries joined the war on terror, offering intel, logistical help, even troops. But at the same time, the way the U.S. responded also created new tensions, new conflicts around the world. The wars in Afghanistan and especially Iraq were highly controversial, drew significant criticism, even from traditional allies. Some saw U.S. actions as too unilateral. The high number of civilian casualties caused real friction. And then there was the use of controversial interrogation techniques, what many call torture at places like Guantanamo Bay, Abu Ghraib. That drew massive international criticism, raised serious questions globally about American values, human rights, adherence to international law. Those actions, documented by human rights groups and even some government reports, created these deep ethical and legal problems that the U.S. is still dealing with.
Yeah, what really stands out is just how wide that ripple effect was, globally. A single day didn't just change internal policy or how safe people felt. It fundamentally changed how America interacted with the whole world. It created moments of incredible unity, unprecedented cooperation between allies. But it also created these unexpected divisions, sparked criticism from all corners. The world after 9/11 had to grapple with this new security reality. It forced deeper intelligence sharing, made countries rethink sovereignty when dealing with groups that weren't states, and culturally, societally, here in America, the impact was just massive and really personal for a lot of people. It created this deep sense of vulnerability, this fear that just hadn't been there for many Americans before. Suddenly, terrorism felt like a real domestic threat. And because of that, in the immediate aftermath, a lot of people were more willing to accept restrictions on civil liberties if it meant more security. New anxieties popped up, public transport, large gatherings. But almost paradoxically, the attacks also sparked this incredibly powerful wave of patriotism and national unity. People really came together right afterwards. Huge surge in volunteering, donating blood, giving money. This profound sense of shared grief, but also shared resilience. Communities trying to heal, support each other. The American flag was everywhere. But we also have to acknowledge, and our sources point this out, that period also saw a really troubling rise in Islamophobia. Increased suspicion, discrimination against Muslim Americans who were often unfairly blamed or targeted. It just irrevocably changed how Americans thought about their country, their safety, their place in the world, fostered both solidarity and some really difficult societal divisions.
It's fascinating, that dual impact, isn't it? Almost contradictory. You have this heightened fear, this willingness to accept new limits, running right alongside this amazing surge of unity, compassion, community spirit. It really highlights the complex emotional reaction of a nation in crisis, how people respond to tragedy with both fear and incredible solidarity, adapting their lives but also seeking connection, shared purpose. It shows that powerful, sometimes unpredictable interplay between trauma and resilience. And this wasn't just an American story, not by a long shot. The 9/11 attacks led to fundamental changes in how the entire world thinks about security and terrorism. They proved undeniably, that terrorism could be carried out on this massive coordinated scale, that it could inflict devastating damage, not just physically but psychologically, on entire nations. And crucially, it showed that no country, no matter how powerful or isolated it seemed, was truly immune. That realization forced this global reckoning, led to new international strategies for preventing and responding to terrorist threats, pushed countries to rethink border security, how they share intelligence, even the definition of international conflict itself.
So what does that mean for the world outside the U.S.? It forced this global rethink of security, spurred unprecedented international intel sharing, changed international law, ideas about sovereignty when dealing with non-state groups. The threat of terrorism, maybe once seen as localized or just occasional, was now recognized globally as this pervasive thing. It required constant international cooperation, constant vigilance. Countries everywhere started putting in similar security measures, tightening borders, spending more on counterterrorism. It really shaped a whole new global security landscape. And the legacy of 9/11 is still very much with us today, nearly a quarter century on. It directly led to the longest wars in American history. The U.S., its allies, are still dealing with the aftermath. The human cost, the financial cost of Iraq and Afghanistan, veteran care, regional instability, all of that. And beyond the wars, it led to these significant, sometimes subtle, changes in society and government that still affect our lives. How we travel, what data gets collected, even how public spaces are designed. These attacks keep teaching us important, often hard, lessons about the nature of global terrorism, the need for vigilance, preparedness, adaptable intelligence. They showed threats can come from unexpected places, have devastating results if you're not ready. Ultimately, they really underscored how vital it is to work together nationally and internationally to deal with these complex, evolving threats. National security and global security are just tied together now.
Which brings up an important question for you, the listener, just going about your day. How do these ongoing impacts the security you see at the airport, the foreign policy headlines, the cultural memory, how do they actually shape your life, the world you move through, even all these years later? Do you feel safer, or do you feel like there's been a trade-off, maybe in convenience, maybe in privacy? It's not just history, it's a lived legacy, because at its absolute core, the story of 9/11 is a human story. It just is. It's about the nearly 3,000 people who died that day. Each one had a life, dreams, a family waiting, a job to go back to. The sources from the 9/11 Memorial really bring those individual stories forward, remind you of the immense personal scale. It's about the countless families, friends left behind, dealing with just unimaginable grief, marked forever by that day. It's about the incredible bravery of the first responders, the firefighters, police, paramedics, Port Authority officers who ran into those burning buildings, climbing stairs, knowing the danger, trying to save people amidst the chaos. And fundamentally, it's about the millions of people all around the world whose lives were changed. Their sense of safety, their view of the world, their daily routines, everything shifted.
It's so easy to get caught up in the policy talk, right? The Patriot Act, the alliances, the wars. But at its heart, yeah, it's a story of just incredible human loss. Immense courage, too, spontaneous courage, and profound resilience against something truly unspeakable. It's a stark reminder of how fragile life is, but also how strong the human spirit can be. To come together, to mourn, to rebuild, even after the absolute worst happens. And thinking about all this, it really underscores how important it is to try and understand different perspectives on history. 9/11 wasn't experienced the same way by everyone. Think about survivors in New York versus military families versus people in other countries entirely. People still have different views on the causes, the consequences, the long-term meaning, often shaped by their own experiences, their own context. By actually engaging with those different viewpoints, not to say one is right or wrong, just to understand where they come from, we can get a richer, deeper, more nuanced picture of the attacks and their massive impact. History is rarely simple, especially something like this.
Absolutely. Connecting that to the bigger picture, acknowledging those different views is just crucial for a complete understanding. It stops us from creating this single, simple story, allows for more complexity, more empathy, and ultimately a more accurate reflection. Because this deep dive into 9/11, it isn't just about the past. It's a story that is absolutely informing our present and will keep shaping our future. The attacks continue to influence how we think about security, terrorism. They impact policy, technology, international cooperation. Decades later, their legacy is alive. It's a constant reminder of why vigilance and preparedness matter in a world where threats can emerge from anywhere, evolve quickly. We can learn so much from 9/11 about working together to prevent and respond to threats, about the need to protect our core values, our principles, even when under pressure, and maybe most importantly, about remembering those who were lost and honoring the incredible resilience people showed in the face of unimaginable tragedy. Ultimately, it's a story about the human spirit's ability to endure and to find ways to unite even after the darkest days.
So as we reflect on the huge lasting impact of 9/11, the day when everything just shattered, really understanding this history and all its complexity, how does it push us to rethink not just security, but maybe our shared responsibility in building a more resilient future? And maybe more personally, what unanswered questions does this huge historical turning point leave you with about our world, about human nature, about where we go from here?